Today, we're diving into a seriously fascinating investigation into a centuries-long chain reaction. We usually learn history as these totally isolated events, right? A war here, a random discovery there. But our source material today completely flips that on its head. It views world history as this deeply interconnected, highly intentional sequence of events. It's basically a giant domino effect, bridging the East and the West, linking ancient prophecies all the way to the smartphone sitting right there in your pocket.
The author's core thesis is pretty much perfectly captured in his own words. History is not a cold record of dates. I see a series of divine dominoes designed to bring us closer together. That right there is the lens through which we're going to look at the next 1,000 years of history today. It's this mind-blowing idea that seemingly isolated conflicts, scientific advancements, and political shifts were actually intimately connected pieces of a much grander design, all kind of nudging humanity toward a shared destiny.
Section 1. The First Domino, a 7th Century Prophecy. So, to find the absolute first domino in this sequence, we actually have to rewind the clock all the way back to the 7th century Arabian desert. Picture this. It's the year 622, and the Prophet Muhammad predicts the conquest of Constantinople. Now, for 800 years, this remains a huge spiritual North Star for the Islamic world. Fast forward to 1453, and Sultan Mehmed II actually fulfills that prediction, which sends this massive economic shockwave across the entire globe. Why? Because by taking that critical Silk Road hub, panicked European empires suddenly had to find completely new trade routes. And that leads us directly to 1492. Desperate for resources, the Spanish royals decide to finance Christopher Columbus. So a spiritual goal over in the East literally triggered the age of discovery in the West. Crazy, right? Section 2. The Global Laboratory, Light in the Dark Ages. But hold on, because before that massive global expansion across the oceans could even happen, a serious scientific foundation had to be laid. While Europe was slogging through the Dark Ages, Islamic civilizations were absolutely thriving. You had these incredible hubs like Baghdad's House of Wisdom and Cordoba making massive, game-changing leaps in medicine, trigonometry, and philosophy. European scholars actively traveled to these Eastern centers to study, absorbing what our source text calls the oxygen that ultimately sparked the European Renaissance. I mean, without the math and science preserved and advanced in the Islamic world, those European ships of exploration would literally never have been able to navigate the globe. And the dominoes just keep falling in the most unexpected ways. By the 16th century, Ottoman military pressure actually reaches the gates of Vienna. And because the Holy Roman Emperor is entirely distracted by this massive threat coming from the East, he just can't effectively crush Martin Luther. As a result, the Protestant Reformation is allowed to take root and grow in the West, which the text argues planted the very seeds of American religious liberty. So Eastern military movements directly, though totally unintentionally, facilitated Western religious freedom. Talk about a wild butterfly effect.
Section 3. Shaping the New World, Discovery and Destruction.
So as Columbus sailed west in 1492, his journey actually had a really distinct Eastern connection. He was aided by these incredibly advanced maps created by a 12th century Muslim geographer named Al-Idrisi. But the author is really careful to emphasize a profound duality to this age of discovery. On one side, sure, you have the promises made to the European royals, vast new territories, unbelievable wealth in silver and gold, and of course, the funding of the Renaissance itself. But on the flip side, the text directly confronts the devastating human cost. Millions of indigenous people and Africans were killed or enslaved. Entire cultures were destroyed. Diseases spread like wildfire, and resources were just ruthlessly exploited. The author asks a really vital question here. Was all this bloodshed actually necessary? It's a very sobering reminder of the tragedies endured to build the foundations of the Americas. Now, despite that really dark history, the author points out something fascinating. Early American values actually intersected with Islamic figures quite frequently in these moments of very pragmatic friendship. For instance, the text highlights Thomas Jefferson. He actually bought a Quran way back in 1765 and insisted that civil rights absolutely must apply to Muslims just as they do to any other believer. Then there's Abraham Lincoln. He was so deeply moved when the Algerian leader Emir Abdel Kader saved thousands of Christians in Damascus that Lincoln actually sent him gold-inlaid pistols as a thank you. And later on, FDR's 1945 meeting with King Abdul Aziz established a partnership based on shared future development rather than just old-school imperialism. The author argues that these are pivotal historical moments where the dominoes of mutual respect just keep showing up. Section 4. Modern Interconnectedness, the World Today. Bringing this entire narrative right up into the modern era, the core takeaway from our source material is that, hey, we are all in the exact same boat now. Looking at the modern landscape, the author outlines a few very specific critiques of recent American policy, basically arguing that they run totally counter to this interconnectedness. For example, Tarifi argues that post-9/11 measures, like the Patriot Act and Guantanamo Bay, have deeply damaged the foundations of the U.S. Constitution. He also heavily critiques the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, framing them as heavy burdens driven mainly by oil and security interests. Furthermore, the author expresses some real deep sadness over policies from the Trump administration regarding immigration, specifically the building of walls and various travel restrictions. Basically, Tarifi's main argument here is that isolation just simply isn't a viable option in today's highly connected world. The author sees the ultimate reflection of all this modern interconnectedness in today's youth, but he points out a really deep contradiction. On one hand, the text highly praises the powerful political voice of university students, who are showing global solidarity with places like Gaza and Lebanon, and who are actively rejecting colonialism. Yet the author points out a truly tragic paradox alongside that. While finding this incredible moral voice, these exact same youths are simultaneously facing a silent, devastating epidemic of mental health struggles, despair, suicide, and addiction.
So how do we protect the youth? Well, Tarifi argues for a return to the family unit as a sanctuary. He sees it as a crucial place to build up internal armor against the world's despair, coupled with taking a very firm stand against drugs and alcohol. Then, zooming out to a geopolitical level, he argues that the U.S. simply must economically integrate with Mexico and Central America. His point is that we can't just live in luxury while our neighbors are struggling. Finally, he calls for some very active political participation, particularly from Arab and Muslim populations in the West, stressing how absolutely crucial the upcoming 2026 and 2028 elections are going to be. The big takeaway, cooperation, not isolation, is presented as our basic moral obligation.
Section 5. The final domino. The algorithm.
All right, this brings us to the final act of today's explainer. We've talked about emperors, ancient maps, and American presidents, but what is the ultimate, final piece of this historical puzzle? Believe it or not, it all comes back to a 9th century polymath named Al-Khwarizmi. He's the guy who developed the mathematical language that is literally the foundation of today's internet, the algorithm. Now, remember that 7th century prophecy we started with way back at the beginning? Well, the author notes there's another tradition stating that the message would eventually enter every single house. And through Al-Khwarizmi's ancient math, powering our incredibly modern internet, that prediction has practically become a digital reality.
And that leads us to this incredibly empowering thought straight from the author. You have the most powerful weapon in history in your pocket, your smartphone. Use it to change the world. When you think about it, the laboratory of history, all those centuries of falling dominoes, of massive cross-cultural exchanges, of scientific discoveries in the East, literally leading to revolutions in the West, it has all culminated in giving modern youth the exact tools they need. Now, they just have to provide the heart. I want to leave you with this final thought as we wrap up today's explainer. We've traced these divine dominoes from ancient wind-swept deserts all the way to modern digital screens, proving that ultimately we really are just one big human family. But, history isn't over. With the algorithm sitting right there in our pockets, what is the next domino going to be in our global laboratory? Thank you so much for exploring this absolutely fascinating perspective with me today. Keep asking questions, keep connecting those dots, and I'll see you next time.